talked a little bit about, we excerpted a bit about Eric working for Halo, and I asked him to talk specifically about what happened there and kind of some things that went on there, and here's what he had to say. I was going to ask you a little bit about Halo, and I was going to ask you where that Halo movie script that you've written is and why we're not seeing it on screen yet.
Oh, I never wrote a Halo movie script.
No, come on now, you did.
I didn't. I absolutely didn't.
No, I'm just messing with you a little. Yeah.
Danny Boyle, I think, wrote it. No, the script work I did on Halo was in the actual game itself. About 80% of what you hear in the first game while you're in mission, not the cutscene stuff, was written by me, Matt Sull, and Brandon Boren. And that was...
I was kidding about the movie script. I wasn't sure if you were a fan of the game as well as have worked on the game. But could you give people a sense of how that might be different from instead of sitting down in front of your notepad, word processor, or however you do your writing, and how that process of maybe interjecting the video game dialogue and doing that sort of writing might be different from, say, comic book writing? Can you give somebody a sense of that?
Sure. What is your show's policy on profanity?
Go right ahead. We're fine with it. We're fine with it.
Compared to comics, writing for video games is utter insanity. In my personal case, and Halo was a particularly extreme example because it was a launch title for a new console. Right. Had been developed more or less 3 or 4 times in different forms by Bungie prior to their being acquired by Microsoft. Bungie employees, I'm going to speak in broad generalities.
Please.
There were individuals within the company that I thought were just fine individuals, but I dealt with more, assholes, for lack of a better term, on a daily basis with Bungie than any other professional experience in my life. Like, there was not a day that I did not just get pinwheeled into blind rage. They were just horrible to work with. So, for example, on Halo, John Howard, who was the lead designer on the first game, and a good friend of mine, and we worked together on the first Crimson Skies PC game. He was one of the Facet guys, and when Bungie got acquired and decided they were going to develop for the game for the Xbox, he was kind of placed on the Bungie team. And I don't want to speak for him, but as an outsider, it sure looked like they resented it an awful lot. But a lot of what really works in Halo 1 is because of John. And fairly late in the process, like you're shooting at that just immovable target of the console launches on X date, and if your game ain't there, you're in real trouble.
Yep.
0 hour was fast approaching, and I got kind of a panicky call from John telling me, hey, who would you recommend as a writer? Because so-and-so, and I won't use names, the guy who was supposed to write the script had not done a job that people were happy with. And what was available was wildly disorganized, and nobody could really track down everything they needed. And, hey, we go into the studio to record this on Monday, and this is like a Tuesday. Who would you recommend in your Rolodex of freelancers to help punch this up? As well, it'll take Microsoft 30 days to spit out a contract, and nobody's going to write the job without a contract, so you're kind of hosed unless you use me and Brandon, who was my partner in my group at the time, and we agreed to do it. At the same time, we were trying to get the Halo novel publishing program up and running, and Bungie was hemming and hawing about it. And the guy who ran my group, who was later, shall we say, unceremoniously transferred to another group and then out of the company, decided that since Bungie was so hard to work with, we should concentrate on that smash hit Xbox game Bloodwake. You've heard of that, right? Of course you haven't. No one has. It's a horrible game. And so through a staggering series of insubordinate acts, me and my direct supervisor had managed to get a publishing program contract in place with Del Rey, but they wouldn't, not signed, but like all the contract work was done. And I finally told John, it's like, look, the hemming and hawing on the book has to stop. I'll do your scripts for you with Brandon, but you guys have to say yes to the novel. So I'm not saying you have to approve everything. You should feel free to go through and approve and change, and it's still your property, but you got to at least let the guys sign the contract.
Yeah, you got to green light it, right?
Yeah, and they said, sure, yeah, we can do that. And that went all the way up to, at the time, it was Jason Jones and Alex Seropian. These were the two founders of Bungie. And they agreed to it. And then Brandon and I spent 3 days writing scripts for this game that we weren't allowed to look at.
Wow.
Yeah, and unlike most, like for film or for comics, you're writing in a word processor. You're writing in Microsoft Word or, a screenwriting program like Final Draft.
Office, yep.
Yeah. No, they do it all in Excel. I'm not sure why.
Okay.
I guess just to track which dialogue, because every dialogue string has a numeric code that the computer, that the program has to look for.
Sure.
So it's a clunky, awkward experience to begin with, and then on top of it, you can't actually see the game. So
you're writing blind mostly then, yeah?
Yeah, and I don't know if you've played the first game.
I have.
Okay, so there's a moment when you crash on Halo, and it's the first time you're kind of bombing around in the Warthog, and at one point, Cortana said something like, that cave is not a natural formation, you know?
Yes, I think I recall the moment,
And what had been described to us was, well, you won't be able to see that this is, you know, the entrance to an underground facility until you're actually going through this cave entrance. That's what they told us. What actually ended up being in the game was this giant, like 800-foot tall, like clearly artificial door. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, this is very much reminding me of an SNL skit or some other skit where I saw where they've got like Mark Wahlberg or somebody and they're telling him, okay, now roll around, and he's going, well, how do I know what to do? He's going, don't worry, we're going to CG it in. We're going to CG it in. It's going to be fine. Just roll around and bark and do all this crap, but don't worry, we're going to CG that in. And then he does something else and he says, but I can't see my co-star. He's like, just we'll CG it in. Just do the best you can. You know, it sounds a lot like that.
Yeah, but not as funny. You know, when your job is actually dependent on it.
Exactly.
So yeah, that was sort of my, you know, that was sort of the beginning of the rise into utter intolerableness. That was my working relationship with Bungie. And to be fair, by that point, the well had been so poisoned. I'm sure I was no picnic to interact with either. There's only so many times you can walk into a meeting and have people tell you to your face that you're an idiot before you kind of stop really caring what they say. And the assumption that I was an idiot was simply because I didn't work with them in Chicago. I was a Microsoft guy. It was awful.
Which was my question, were you, what did they call that, an orange card carrying guy? Were you like a vested employee with Microsoft? And I asked this question only because it sounds like Bungie had a huge span of control in this process. I would think that Microsoft would have had more say in terms of it's going on their console, this, and this. But the way you make it sound, the ball was more in Bungie's court to shoot as they want. No or yes?
Oh, God. Okay, yeah, well, to answer your first question, I was at that point what was called the Blue Badge. I was a full-time direct hire.
Blue Badge, okay.
Yeah, I had been a contractor in A- or Orange Badge for a couple of years and then transitioned over to full-time staff, certainly by the time Bungie arrived. Yes, nominally Microsoft owns those studios, but at that point the management culture there was so terrified that they were going to lose their balls on the Xbox that they just needed those developers. They needed them so badly, and I was convinced that if Bungie demanded hookers blowing ice cream every Friday, they'd have gotten them.
You're going to get hookers blowing ice cream. And the game had already had such a huge, oh my God, run-up because it was coming out on Apple and the Warthogs, and there was all of this sort of buzz that was going with it, and then all of a sudden it was, it's going to Xbox. So yeah, I guess I could see how you'd feel that way. So not writing as the norm, more like... And I'm guessing a property like that, you had a lot of eyeballs watching you. So not just Bungie management, but here come the Microsoft management guys, and they're wondering what the hell's going on and all that other stuff, correct?
Well, actually, Microsoft management didn't get involved until Brandon and I had finished our script work. We'd finished it a day early. And I told John, okay, I need that approval on the Del Rey contract. And that's when Alex and Jason kind of started hemming and hawing again. And, well, we're really not sure, so we don't think we're actually going to give that approval. And I said, that's fine, because I didn't send the file yet, and I can delete it. That's not a problem. It got all the way up to Ed Fries, who at that time was the VP in charge of what became Microsoft Game Studios. Oh my God, he was livid. But I stood my ground, and they approved the novel, which went on to sell like a ridiculous number of copies. Right? Everyone thought that Halo: Fall of Reach was going to sell like 35,000 copies. I have no idea how many hundreds of thousands of copies it's up to now, but it's made everybody a boatload of money, and it's a good book. Eric Nyland is a talented writer.
He did great with the Crimson Skies book that I read, too.
Yeah. And the funny part is we did that novel in 7 weeks. It was, it was pretty insane. I would do stuff like that. I would write scripts and web content like those Crimson Skies pieces of serialized fiction, but I was also writing a lot of story bibles and property guides for exterior licensees so they could hire, for example, Eric Nyland to go write a Halo novel, and here's all the information you need to know so we don't have to distract the Bungie guys from the business of making the game. And there's all sorts of stuff like that.
Did you play video games? Did that interest you, or were you just in it for the writing? I mean, was there something else driving you, like, this will be a cool game? But I mean, once you drink enough of the Kool-Aid, I know anything can become sour.
When I first started at Microsoft, it really was more about, hey, I've got a job. I had been at West End Games, a Dice and Paper role-playing game company, for many years, working predominantly on the Star Wars role-playing game. And through a well-documented online, and I'm not going to get into it here, a series of misadventures, the company folded.
I remember. That's when you and I first, I think, spoke to each other, either right after that or right in between that.
And it was bad, and I was working a temp job to temp job for I don't know, a year, maybe wow. close to 2, and literally was down to my last $100 when Jordan Weissman of FASA fame and FASA Interactive had been purchased by Microsoft. Kind of called me out of the blue and recruited me into the organization. So I was they kind of had me over a barrel. I had to take the job, and I'd played video games when I was a kid. I had an Atari and ColecoVision and stuff.
But I'm guessing you don't have an Xbox console in your house right now.
I do. Actually, I've got a couple.
Oh, okay.
I over time, I think the one that finally kind of put me over the hump was Mech Warrior 3, because I was one of the guys playtesting that, and by playtesting, I mean I spent my lunch hours playing that game religiously in its beta form. Loved that game. I mean, part of it was when I was on a good game, I got very interested in gaming, but more often than not, I was put on a really crappy game. That was really hard to deal with.
Yeah. When I spoke to Mike Barron, do you know Mike?
I am aware of Mike Barron.
Okay, yeah. Well,
Nexus.
Yeah, I spoke to him last week, and he said, I forget the source he was quoting, but he said, comics are kind of a tough biz right now. Not even the biggest comics move more than about 100,000 units. And I'm curious if you think games like Halo and video games and things like that are what's cutting into that, or are there more distractions and are comics kind of having to compete against those distractions? Where do you stand on that?
Trying to come up with a not career limiting answer.
Yeah, I feel you.
For one thing, I don't. Best-selling comics selling 150,000 copies are the reported ones. One of the guilty secrets of the comic industry seems to be the Gears of War comic, which sells tons, but it doesn't sell them all through Diamond, which means those published numbers are kind of artificially low. I had been told, and again, this is possibly just completely apocryphal, but that book was doing twice what the best-selling Marvel and DC books were doing. So I think probably the biggest barrier to an expanding readership is the continued insistence on catering to an aging market that wants the same thing but just a little bit different over and over again. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody. I've done plenty of work-for-hire corporate character gigs. Like I worked on Action Comics, The Shield, JSA. These are characters that you can't really...
Army of Two?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Actually, I had a little bit more freedom with Army of Two, believe it or not. Because those characters were not...
I remember flipping through your portfolio and remember that was one of the ones you worked on. I wasn't trying to...
Yeah, I edited that one and had to letter it kind of at the last minute. It's not... That was more project management than anything.
Yeah.
Things are so continuity heavy, at the big two right now. You almost need an attending Wikipedia hyperlink to know what's going on in some of those books if you haven't been reading those comics for 15, 20 years.
Final question on the Halo. Do you still follow it? Do you think it's going in the right direction, or are you a fan?
November 9th, the year Halo 2 came out, I forget what year that was, I want to say 04 or 05, was literally the end of my involvement and interest in Halo. It tends to make me too angry when we concocted the special units that drop from the ships, the ODSTs, and we're told, well, you need to justify to us why we need these. It's like, well, for one thing, you could spin it off into ancillary fiction, or it could be an elite unit in your game, or here's cool things that we can do, and it serves a military need in this cockamamie space military you kind of built.
Thrown together, yeah.
That doesn't make any sense. And we're told, well, that's stupid. Nobody's ever going to care about those. And yet they go off and make an ODST game. Yeah. Here's a funny comic Halo story. At one point, my group had managed to put together a creative team and a publisher, which is now since defunct. It was John Reber, who wrote Books of Magic and, and the Army of Two thing that I ended up working with him on. He's a really good writer of military stuff. And Adi Granov, who later went on to do 1 million covers for, the Iron Man comics and designed the movie armor for Iron Man, who would have been a slam dunk for a Halo comic. We put together a really solid creative pitch, and we're told by Bungie management that really because they'd never heard of Johnny Reber and Adi Granov, they didn't really trust that team. Now, bear in mind, the most recent comic these guys had read was Spawn #1 in many cases, right? Comics that were 10 years old at this point.
Yep.
And what they really wanted was a creative team how about Alan Moore and Joe Kubert? Because apparently they think very highly of themselves.
Yeah.
And I remember distinctly having that conversation with, his name was Peter Parsons. He was the studio head of Bungie after Alex Seropian departed to start a new company.
Oh, okay.
And I was just kind of shocked. I was you honestly think, putting aside the fact that Joe Kubert is an industry legend and kind of has his own thing going on.
Right.
And probably doesn't have time in his schedule to draw a monthly comic book.
Nor probably doesn't want to. I think his school's doing all right.
Yeah. And then you've got Alan Moore, who's not exactly Mr. Military science fiction.
No.
I mean, Halo Jones was about it, and he never finished it.
Yeah.
And had sworn off at that point, like very violently sworn off doing any more mainstream comic work because he was so embittered by the whole Wildstorm, DC, America's Best Comics thing.
Yeah.
I was like, you're never, ever going to be able to convince him to do it. He works on the things that he creates and he owns. He's not going to want to do property development for you for nothing. And Pete's response was, we're Microsoft. We can find his price. This is the guy who gives all of his Hollywood money to his artists. Like, you can't buy Alan Moore because Alan Moore has completely different priorities than the rest of the universe.
Yeah, the guy who said, take my name off the movie, I don't give a shit.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then maybe a year later, Bungie had on their own nickel and had overpaid dramatically to create, it was called the Halo graphic novel. I think DC ultimately published it. And that whole introduction by one of the art folk at Bungie was essentially a veiled dig at my entire group and how, like, we had told them they couldn't work with the talent they wanted to work with, so they went out and found the talent they wanted to work with, and I was like, I don't see Alan Moore or Joe Kubert in here. I almost wanted a couple pages of rebuttal, Like, yeah, it was really maddening. It was just a constant stream of insults and weird short-sighted decisions and stuff that other people outside their little sphere created that they have certainly been happy to monetize. Like the ODSTs, that's a great example. They would never acknowledge that idea didn't come from them. It came from me and Eric Nyland. In fact, I think I saw a recent reprint of Fall of Reach, which, Eric had thanked me in the acknowledgments because I had kind of gotten him the gig and edited the whole book and got him his money, et cetera, and that credit had been excised. But really?
Yeah.
They've kind of erased me from that property altogether, and that's perfectly fine with me. So that's my happy Halo story. Sorry, Halo fans.
All right, guys, that's Eric Trautmann talking about Halo. Interesting stuff, believe me, and compelling stuff. Mike, you're still playing Halo, right?
Yeah, in fact, I was happy this past week I ranked up to Eclipse in Halo Reach, and every time I play a game now, I'll either get an email like, hey, please be my friend, or somebody says, get a life, Dude,
my 7-year-old's better than that. Come on.
Yeah.
No.
But what's funny is
don't tell Mike that. He'll want to challenge your 7-year-old.
And he'll die. He'll lose. Anyway.
Look at my stats. Hey, tell him to send me a friend.